Dr. Walker, Dominique Walker, she's been a researcher here for a few years. That's all I'm going to say. She has her PhD from the University of Geneva, Switzerland. She trained at the Salk Institute and at the University of California in San Francisco before joining McGill a few years ago. She's professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Anatomy and Cell Biology at McGill University. She works on stress responses, development, lactation, obesity, metabolism, and a series of issues around hormones and women. And she will be giving us a very interesting talk tonight. So thank you for being here, Dominique. Please have the stage.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for attending this last series. So today, and I would like to introduce a little bit on what we're going to talk about is a little bit how sex hormones can influence our brain. And I would like to take you into a little journey through our lifespan, in fact. And we're going to talk about development in the brain and also how those hormones continue to affect us throughout older age, I would say. And so this is really, you know, you remember probably from your classes in college or CEGEP, you know, what you've learned about biology, right? That our sex hormones are very important, but we'll see again some of those notions, but incredibly is that to know that they are here and they are going to affect many of our behavior throughout our life in very different ways. So that's a little bit what I would like to introduce today. I'm going to introduce the cast of characters, and those we'll be talking about mostly is estrogens. We'll be talking also about progesterone, and we'll be talking about the male hormone, testosterone, a little bit, because as you know, all women have also testosterone. So, where do those strange species come from? Those little structures here are a bit funny, but they are actually the basis of many of the hormones that we call steroids in our body. This is cortisol, the stress hormone. This is gonadal steroids, or sex hormones, if you want. Those same type of structures. Okay, and where are those hormones produced? The main area where they're produced, of course, the ovaries, the testes, but they can be also produced in the adrenal gland. There's a little gland that is right above the kidney that actually does a lot of things for the size of this gland. Fat tissue. Did you know that fat tissue can do a lot of hormones, can do some estrogens, can do cortisol, and in fact, this is why when we put a little bit of fat around here, this is not such a good thing because we end up producing a lot more of those hormones. And in fact, the brain can also do some of those hormones, and in different ways and in different areas. We can find estrogens also in plants, and this is what we call phytoestrogens. You can find them in beans, in soya, and they are estrogens that are the same structures, but they come from plants. And often you could actually use those as similar to the estrogens that our own body makes. And why we had such a concern about what you've heard about BPA when you buy a plastic bottle or containers for your microwave, plastic containers, people really try to look at the label and say, well, I don't want any BPA. What is BPA? And so BPA is a chemical polluant, if you want, that can mimic, act like some of our own estrogens. So, and in some instances, it's not a good idea because it will actually block the action of our own estrogens. So it's part of the what we call the environmental pollutants. And those BPA, in fact, we've had an experience in our facility, in our animal facility, where we actually have plastic bottles for our little creatures that we study. And time, we bought a new batch of plastic bottles. We put them through the cage washer and through the washer, which is very high temperature, like our dishwasher. And we realized that after some time, our little creatures didn't reproduce so well. And what had happened is that the BPA that were in the plastic slowly got released in the bottle, and we filled those bottles with water. And so our animals were ingesting a lot of those type of molecules that in fact was inhibiting their reproductive system. So this is one thing that is important to know with BPA. It comes off the plastic once you heat the plastic at a high temperature. So I needed to show you this because I thought that was really funny. You've probably seen that in school at some point, maybe a while ago, is this is the synthetic pathway. How do we produce estrogen? How does our body produce estrogen? And it's from good old cholesterol, and then you have all those little steps here that you can from one molecule to the next. A lot of different enzymes are implicated. You can see to me, it's a little bit of a maze, right? And I thought the figure legend says, simplified scheme of steroid metabolism. And to me, it's complicated, right? I love this movie, by the way. So it's complicated. We're not going to get into that, but I just wanted to show you that it's not, our body is so well designed that we have all those enzymes that exactly know how to transform one molecule to the next, and to the next, and to the next. Oops, not to this one, this one. And depending on the sex, you're going to have more estrogen and progesterone for women and more testosterone for men. So I wanted to start our journey. And as I said, I wanted to go from our sort of lifespan and give you a little vignette, a little glimpse of the different times when those molecules are important. So, and we're going to start with before birth. Fetal life is that's the beginning of our journey. And I'm going to show you this graph several times. So I just want to mention here, we're going to start before birth, but those are the levels of estrogens here throughout life and testosterone also throughout life. So we will see this graph again, so we will take those different periods in life and then discuss them separately. But I wanted to show you we start with fetal life. And fetal life, as you know, if you remember from your college class, we have XX, which is the female, and XY, which is the male. And what we call the genotype is defined from the two cells that started a human being. Okay, so you either have the XX or you have the XY. But why do we say that the default development of the fetus is female? Because really, if you don't have the action of the hormones, of the sex hormones, in particular testosterone, at a certain time during fetal development, the brain will not get masculinized. So it's only because towards the end of gestation, in the third trimester, you have an increase in testosterone in the male, in the boys. And this increase in testosterone is responsible for differentiating the brain. So you're going to do either a male brain, or if you don't have testosterone, this testosterone increase, it's going to stay a female brain. So it's really during this last trimester of gestation, boys have about 10-fold higher levels of testosterone than girls. But you can still see from this graph that there's not a lot of steroids around, but those are enough to be very powerful. And interestingly enough, testosterone will then, this increase in testosterone at a certain time in gestation will masculinize the brain. And you know how it will do this? It will get transformed into estrogens in the brain. So there are some neurons that will be responding to the testosterone, that, the testosterone will go into the cell, get transformed into estrogen, and then that is the process through which it will masculinize the brain. So I thought that was fairly interesting that testosterone is acting through a female hormone to masculinize the brain. Again, the brain at this time is like a big Christmas factory, okay? It does a lot of things in a very short amount of time. I mean, it's incredible the amount of energy that it must take to create a brain. At this time, the brain is very busy making a lot of neurons, lots of connections that we call synapses between the neurons. It's like it's establishing a huge amount of circuits, but you can't keep all those circuits because then you're going to have like something totally disorganized. So what it does, it also trims. Okay, I'm going to take this type of neurons and not that one. I'm going to take this type of connections because they're the most efficient and delete the other ones. So it does all those kind of things even before we're born. So it's a lot of work actually that gets done before birth. Fine-tuning all the systems. And it doesn't stop at birth, you will see. You know probably how much the brain keeps on being refined in several of the processes. And in fact, what we know is that at birth, 25% of the brain is complete. Can you imagine this? 25%. And to me, it's a bit on the side with my comment here, but that's why it's so important to take care of fetal health as much as after birth. The whole growing up period is so important and so critical to put the right system in place. Because you can imagine with all this activity going on that, some stressors or some environmental insults can have a long-term effect on how the brain functions. But that's a little bit on the side of the topic of today, but it's something that is very dear to me. So, neurons. Those are neurons from a rat brain. And so just to illustrate what they look like, those little things look like spider webs a little bit. And you have the neuron, the core of the neuron here, and then you have all those dendrites that makes the connections among other types of neurons, sometimes very far away from their immediate environment and sometimes very close to their immediate environment. I just wanted to illustrate here so this is what we call a dendrite that makes the connections with the other neurons. And I wanted to show you those little things that bud out. Those are actually what we call synaptic boutons. And those are the ones that make the connections. I just wanted to show you what it looks like, because we always talk about the brain, but seldom we see exactly what a neuron looks like. It's for us, it's our best friends. Yeah. So to come back to the estrogens and the estradiol, which is the main estrogen, and it's really like the 12 work of Heracles, because they are important to regulate, to control cell multiplication, survival. As I was telling you, some of the cells will remain, some of the cells will die. The formation of the connection between the cells, and also this elongation of the neurons, of the dendrites. You remember those long things? Well, if you have very short one, you're not going to do a lot of connections. And if you can elongate them and you can differentiate them, then you have more chances of making the right connections. So at this stage, we're still in fetal life. We're still in a fetus. And that's what we call an organizational effect of the estrogens. And they organize both the function of the brain and, in fact, the behavior. Because what is the behavior but the way that our brain functions in some circumstances? So this is all dependent on how the circuits are formed and if you form the right synapses at the right time. But in general, these hormones will differentiate. I was telling you the testosterone will demasculinize the brain, masculinize the brain, and defeminize the brain at the same time. And in fact, the end product is very often we see that males have more neurons in some areas of the brain, and females will make more connections between neurons. So it's a different brain. We all have the same functions, okay? We respond to emotions, we are sad sometimes, we know when we are hungry, we know when we're cold. We have the same functions, but they are expressed a little bit differently. And it's because physiologically we're a bit different. I want to give you an example on how the estrogen control the formation of those connections between neurons. And you can see here on the, this is an example of the female dendrite. So this is a neuron, the dendrite, and this is an example of a female and a male. And you can see that there are more of those things sticking out to trying to make contact. I don't want to infer that women want to make more contact, but I want to stay politically correct here. But it's an analogy. You can think about it the way you want. Okay? So as time goes on, and I like to call it a work in progress, because really this is what it is, a work in progress. We start, and I wanted to give you this example. We start at 5 years old here, and here it's an example of the gray matter density. And gray matter density is the density of your neurons. And if you look, the more dense is you have a lot of red, and the less dense you have a lot of blue, okay? And so between the age of 5 and the age of 20, look how much we're losing neurons. Look how much we're trimming down, how much the brain has been busy before the age of 5 and even in fetal development to make a lot of neurons. And then what happens later is slowly, but then you refine the circuits, you make some of them disappear. And I just wanted to show you what a human brain look like, because I don't know if you've had a chance to see ever a human brain, but this is an image of a human brain. And it's one brain that we have here at the Douglas Brain Bank, and it's courtesy of the Douglas Brain Bank. And I want to acknowledge the people who actually donate their brain for research. And this is what we have here, a fantastic, fantastic resource here, really a unique resource at the Douglas. So as I said to you, so it means that growing up, we have less neurons. So what is it? Do I become more stupid when I grow up? Well, sometimes my kids tell me this, right? Oh, Mom, you don't understand anything. But because they're adolescents, so, I mean, they have the right to say this. But sometimes I feel like, oh, maybe that's what it is. But anyway, so just I thought that was really important to know that we have less neurons as we grow up. So what happened during adolescence, really? And if we go back into our hormones, this is what happens. It's a time when we have a lot of fluctuations. And in fact, hormones don't really know what to do at this stage. They go up one day, they go down another day. 1 week, they're all perfectly fine. The next week, they're just totally out of whack. It's fluctuations. And this is a time when it's really difficult for the system to adjust. And it's like really the hormones are turned on. Now the switch is on, and this is the period what we call the activational effect of hormones. Until then, from this period of organization of the brain before birth until now, it's very quiet. It's a nice lake that has no movement. You go into this phase, and it's like a river. It flows in every direction, and you have no idea which way it's going to go from one day to the next. And this is exactly what is happening at that time. So I just want to mention that, in fact, the last part of the brain to be formed, if we want to be mature, is what we call the prefrontal cortex. It's a region that is right there. And in fact, that's, if you think of it, people playing soccer and receiving those balls on the head, this is the worst place to have it. Because what does the prefrontal cortex do? It is very important for all the decision making, setting up goals, making the right or the wrong decision, controlling impulsivity. It will tell you, okay, I want to eat this large piece of chocolate, even if I know that I should not, but this is impulsivity. Or I'm just going to go and rob a bank, or I will do this because, I'll just go parachute jumping because it sounds like fun. Impulsivity, lack of control sometimes. This is where control comes in, right there. Higher cognitive function, memory, a lot of the fine tasks that we do, evaluation of the situation, is that a risky situation or not? Is that a good place or not for me to be? This is all is happening in the prefrontal cortex. And this is the last place, this is the last region to be mature. So you can understand that during adolescence, there's a lot of vulnerability that is related to this part that is maturing, if you want. What we see in adolescents is they're very vulnerable to stress. And when they come home and say, well, I couldn't care less, I just did that, but it doesn't matter. I don't believe it's true. Because adolescents are very stress responsive. There's a lot of onset of mood disorders during adolescence, anxiety, depression, a lot more in women than in men, as we've noticed for a long time, as we know. Eating disorders, Dr. Israel has talked about this, very, very prevalent in females compared to men. Drug addiction. Drug addiction also very prevalent in women compared to men, maybe the same, but the addiction, what I mean is how addicted are you to a substance? You will see that more in women than in men. And if adolescent, and that's why when I see adolescents smoking or, taking drugs, I say, well, this is exactly the worst time to start. Because if you start in adolescent, you become more addicted. You become more addicted, and this is known. All the studies have shown this. If you start when you're an adult, you get addicted, but real addiction starts in adolescence. And this is because you have those fluctuating hormones levels. And those will affect a number of neurotransmitters in the brain that are important for mediating those pathways. Risk-taking behaviors, well, I think everybody knows about those. So, once we go through adolescence, and we are in a good position, we go into the reproductive years. And it's a little bit more quiet, because the cycles get established, the hormones actually fluctuate in a very regular way most of the time. And so we have still, here, we have a number of places. So again, this is a more stable time of life. This is a reproductive year. This is the time when you basically done with your prefrontal cortex. You're supposed to take sometimes the right decisions. You're more stable, and you then work with your fluctuating hormones levels, which are pretty regular most of the time. So during that time, estradiol is still very important. And it doesn't do as much as making new neurons, losing some. What is important here is to regulate the mood, regulate the amount of neurotransmitter that you have. And you've been probably, about serotonin, which is very important for mood disorders. And so estradiol can act somehow as an antidepressant. It helps for sleep. Of course, the calcification of the bone, cognition, it will increase the cerebral blood flow, and we can say that it's probably also an antioxidant. So it is maybe an anti-aging. So during that time, estradiol is doing all those things. But it's not the only one, because testosterone is important too. And remember, we do have testosterone, less than men, but we do. And what is it important for? It is important for the libido, because it will increase the libido. It will enhance the mood also, like estrogens, and it will help for our muscle growth. So progesterone at that time is a little bit acting with estradiol, and it's thought more as an anxiolytic. So all those three hormones are here to actually give us, all of them, a good, positive growth and attitude, if you want. Those hormones are very important also to maintain the differences, the subtle differences between a male and a female brain. And here I'm giving you just an example of the cognitive functions that are a bit different between men and women. In women, we are good for verbal elocution, fluency in speech, fast processing, and fine motricity. Okay, if people are very delicate work, women usually are better than men at doing it. And we, as I said, we have more connections. This brain requires a lot of energy. For men, they are very good at processing numbers. So arithmetical processing is excellent. Geometrical spatial abilities. That I was wondering, actually, because when you are in the car with your husband and you're looking for a place to go, and they never want to ask anybody, no, I know, you get lost for the fifth time, and you say, well, where the hell is this place? No, I'm going to get it. So sometimes I have doubts, but anyway, it's supposed to be like this. And as I said, they have more neurons in some areas of the brain, which is important for some aspect of behavior. I wanted to mention that in the stage of, if you want this, the adult reproductive years, we, as you probably recognize something that you've seen a million times, what the women's cycle is. But I just wanted to emphasize the fact that it's interesting, because during the time the estradiol goes up before the ovulation, then you have the ovulation, and then progesterone comes after. And there's a little bit of an increase in estradiol at that time. And then you get the menstruation if the egg doesn't get fertilized. But what is interesting is that around the time of ovulation, and it's exactly like if you think of animals, they have to, what will ensure a very successful reproductive time is you have to have a good sense of smell, because you have to smell where the male is. And the male also needs to have a good sense of smell, because he needs to smell where the female is. But for you, it's important. So the smell is enhanced at that time of the cycle. The libido is enhanced also, because it's the time to reproduce. I mean, we are engineered this way, that we need to reproduce. And what is the best time to feel like we want to have a romantic evening is at the time when you're the more susceptible to be pregnant. That's just as simple as that. Cognitive functions are improved also, because you need to be able to find your partner and to know where to go and to have a sense of attention. You have to be more attentive. So all those functions that are in general that we use every day can be affected by the stage of the cycle and the hormones. Pregnancy, also postpartum, of course, those hormones are very important, And again, I just don't want to go into details, but just to mention that, as you know, those hormones drop very quickly once the baby is born. And that is important also. That can stimulate the onset of postpartum blues and postpartum depression. So it's another time when it's a big drop in hormones that can actually precipitate a mood disorder. Now I want to go to the last period that we will cover is really the perimenopause and menopause, because it's another time when all those hormones are fluctuating. And now we're not in the ascending phase, but we're in the descending phase. And you know that we can still be hot, but it comes in flashes now. And why are we talking about this now? And I would not, if I were living about 100 years back, I would never have this talk with you tonight. Because why is that we know about menopause and the long year after menopause? And that really, I find it really so amazing. Because if you look at the life expectancy, in 1900, women and men were not living beyond the age of 48. So 48, you don't have menopause yet, or you're just starting eventually. So nothing, I mean, you don't get this very fascinating period of life that we have now, because our life expectancy is 80. So in 100 years, we've doubled our life expectancy. So of course, with that comes the years of menopause and after menopause. And of course, we see a number of things happening there also, exactly like in adolescence, but a little bit different, is mood disorders, vulnerability to mood disorders. Very often women start having depression around the menopause time, anxiety, metabolic disorders also. This is not only women, but it's more prevalent in women because our estrogens actually will reduce our food intake. And if we eat more and we feel like eating more when we are in this period of time, then we gain a little bit more weight. We have more chances of developing diabetes. Memory and cognitive problems, we see that also, and some aggravation of disease in the absence of estrogens. So really for women at that time, the big question is really hormone replacement, to take or not to take. Really, that's a big question that many women ask themselves when they come to this stage in their life. And I would like to take, just to mention this very bad press that gonadal hormones, that estrogens have had due to this study. If you've heard about the Women's Health Initiative, this research study that was over 10 years, that happened over 10 years and was abruptly finished in 2001. And that gave a terrible press to estrogen. And many women, because of that, entirely stopped taking estrogens. And I think, well, we can talk about that later, but I think that really what is important is that if the hormones are, the hormone replacement is initiated at menopause, we don't see the bad press effect, the bad effect that they've been relayed by this study. And in fact, what we know now is that if the hormone therapy is initiated at menopause, then we know that it prevents some of the memory loss, it reduces the incidence of Alzheimer's, and it doesn't cause more breast cancer or cardiovascular problems. And the breast cancer effects were actually, if you don't have a predisposition to breast cancer, you won't have more chances of developing breast cancer with hormone therapy. So really, this is a little bit, I would like to leave you with this, because, and in fact, we can discuss this a little bit. I'm not a physician, but I think that this is an important issue for women, and that we need to know, knowing that what estrogens do to our brain from before we're born, throughout our lives, and if we understand what they do to our neurons and our synapses and the connections between them, it's important to understand that when they go down, it might be important to sort of regulate how fast they go down, and that a little period of hormone therapy can help a lot going through this transition. So we are at the end of our journey, and I just wanted to mention that it is good to have an end to journey towards, but it really is the journey that matters. And our journey is unique, each one of us, but if we understand some of the processes that go through it, if we understand what our hormones can do to us, we have a better chance of, first, understanding the journey, and second, enjoying it. So thank you very much for your attention.
I wanted to come back to the Women's Health Initiative because I think it's been an issue that's gone, I mean, it's not only bad press, it was systematic bad press and also influencing a lot of physicians in not actually prescribing hormone therapy for women. Can you actually bring us back a little bit and identify some of the things that the study was saying and maybe why it was saying that and it wasn't that good a results?
This study, I think, started around 1993 or so, and in fact was ended around 2000, 2001, just to give you a range. And in fact, and I think it was a great study. Initially, it was really a great study. They wanted to see what is the risk of actually breast cancer, cardiovascular problems. Several studies, there was an initial study and several that were around that, memory loss, Alzheimer, risk for developing Alzheimer, etc., with hormone therapy. The issue of this study really was twofold. One, that they use estrogen replacement and progesterone in the form of synthetic hormones. Really something that's not exactly the same type of molecules that we actually have and make in our body. So that was one thing. And the second thing is, and I think to me the major one that I would like to bring to you tonight, is that they started, the women were 65 and over. So if you're 65 and over, there's been about, let's say menopause is around 50, just to have a round number. You have about 15 years during which you have not seen hormones, basically. I mean, after the drop, you've not seen hormones. So of course, you think your brain has been silent during that time. Your brain has adapted a million ways to actually deal with this. And sometimes it's, we know hot flashes, memory loss, sleep problems, those are, like something that you see constantly around the time of menopause. So this is an adaptation of the brain to this changing environment. So this study actually was done much too late. And in fact, what they showed with this study is that it increased the cardiovascular risk of events, it increased breast cancer, and so that's why they decided that immediately turn it off. You stop the study. And at that time, it got a huge press, and all the women who were taking hormones stopped from one day to the next. And I have a colleague in the Department of Psychiatry who was telling me, you know what it did to us? We were seeing many women, and they plunged into a very deep depression from one day to the next. And really, and that is exactly what gave the hormone therapy such a bad press. But since that time, since 2001, 2002, there have been many, many studies looking at hormone replacement therapy, but doing it sort of a lot earlier. And that's why in my last slide, I was showing you the benefits of having this hormone therapy for a short amount of time, 5, 6, 7 years maybe, right at the menopause. You start right at the menopause, and then you don't see those risks at all. In fact, you see more benefits than risks. And again, I'm not a physician, so those are issues that need to be discussed with your physician, because you need to know if you are susceptible to develop breast cancer estrogen-dependent breast cancer. So you might have a predisposition to do that. Then in this case, it's not a good indication. So you need to discuss that with your physician. But I want to rehabilitate the hormones because they're not so bad, really. And we've living with them for 50 years. So why all of a sudden they would be the bad guys, I have no idea. But this is what the reputation they've acquired.
Yeah, and we're still seeing a lot of that
yes,
around.
Yeah,
and
because
guilt around
people don't like to
too.
take drugs. Drugs,
yeah,
medicine.
Some people do.
Medicine. They don't like to take hormones. Yeah. I want to be natural. But natural, if you can help some of those effects, I would take them. Because those are, anyway, I've done those hormones 50 years of my life. So why should they be bad?
So I imagine they also have an effect. If you're taking them at a good time, they also have an effect on the rates of depression and everything during that time,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So they don't just have a benefit physiologically, but also on your mental health.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
in reducing the risk.
as the different parts of life, estrogens are very important to improve the moods. In adolescence, we were saying, those big variation in estrogens are somewhat responsible for the high vulnerability to depression during the reproductive years as well. And it's the same around menopause. A lot of women go through depression before or perimenopause. That, this was something that we didn't know about 100 years ago.
That's fascinating. You also talked about, so you talked a lot about estrogens and what their role is for women and things like that. But you also talked about, as women, we also have testosterone, and at varying levels, I imagine, from one individual to the next. So what is the role of testosterone in women?
Well, as I indicated, mostly a role of supporting growth also. Has an effect on mood, also stabilize the mood, the libido, muscle growth, basically, maintenance of muscle mass. We have much less testosterone than males.
Yes. But do we see even among women, do we see, for example, women who have different rates of testosterone or different levels of testosterone have different actual behaviors and different physiologies?
Well, among the general population possibly, but it's very difficult to really establish, because I have more testosterone, I'm more aggressive, or I'm more, it's a bit difficult to do this. But there's a condition where the adrenal gland makes a lot more testosterone. Yeah. And so in women. And those women are more masculinized, and so this is a pathological condition, and so we have.
So you see it in sort of some of the abnormalities.
Changes a little bit the behavior to
So it must also have an effect on transgendered individuals in terms of changing moods, also.
Possibly. Yeah.
So, if we understand correctly the way you've been discussing everything, adolescents are more vulnerable to addictions and risk-taking behavior. And so what can we do about that? What can we do about that period if it's hormonally driven?
We have to stand it. On doit supporter. That's the only thing. It's a normal period of life. Yeah. And if I have 2 adolescents at home. So days when it's been really rough, I find saying to myself, this is a normal phase of life. And we have to go through and try to be mildly unharmed by it.
It's an attempt, I think.
It's a normal maturational process. Yeah. And the only thing I would say is try to make them understand. I tell my daughter, she's 16. She wants to go to a bar. She wants to drink alcohol. I said, okay, well, maybe you can have one. But you know why you cannot drink? Well, you know why it's 18 and not 16 that you're allowed to drink alcohol? It's because your brain is not finished. So you want to spoil the whole thing? You spent 16 years of your life making it. So do you want to break it down, or,
So you need a neuroscientist in your family to explain these things, right? to be able
I
to
said,
tell you the...
they've used so much energy, you can't believe it. Not even thinking your parents' energy, but that doesn't count. But just think about it. You want to do this to yourself, and you know what, So they say, oh, Mom, really. I think they probably wish I would do something else in life. So, we're stuck with it now.
I'd like you to come back maybe and maybe it's just re-explain a little bit of the notion of how early on you were talking about how testosterone actually demasculinizes the brain. Defeminizes the brain.
And masculinizes.
Yes, and by using estrogen, actually.
Yes.
By using the...
Yeah.
Can you sort of re-explain that? And
so if I'm going to try to make it simple because it's a bit confusing, even sometimes I get confused. But
that's the hormones at a certain time of... Yeah.
So testosterone goes to the brain and will target, some cells will have like a signal. Okay, I have a receptor for testosterone. This testosterone will go to this neuron, label number 1. A neighboring neuron has not testosterone receptors, but estrogen receptors. So this neuron will not be responsive to testosterone at all. So neuron number 1 will see the testosterone going up, and the testosterone will go inside the cell and be transformed into estrogen, and this is those estrogens in this specific cell that will act on specific genes and determine what this neuron will actually do. And it's very different from neuron number 2 that doesn't have testosterone receptor but has estrogen receptors. And so it's simplified, this is the way that it's acting differently. And neuron number 1 that can transform testosterone into estrogen will have this specific enzyme that does it. And not all the neurons have it. It's called an aromatase. And so that's how testosterone gets transformed into estrogen in this specific neurons. So it's really targeting different population of neurons that talk to very different places in the brain, if you want. And that's how it's differentiating the brain, and some behaviors also that gets supported by the function of those specific neurons. I don't know if I've been clear. You have to ask me if this is something that is going to...
Well, we all thought the World Wide Web was complicated, but this just, this just wins it in terms of programming and deletion. I wanted to come to one phenomenon that some women have later on in life too, is the thyroid problems. And I know thyroid problems are associated with some hormones, but are they associated with the types of hormones that you've talked about tonight? Because we do see some mood issues.
Well, there are many things that can affect mood. And in fact, sometimes they're not always related, but they have a common mechanism through which they affect mood. And in fact, if we think of mood or depression, we can think of one neurotransmitter that is very important, which is serotonin. You've probably heard about serotonin because many of the antidepressants are drugs that will affect the levels of serotonin in the brain. And in fact, in depression, we don't have enough serotonin that gets released. So both thyroid hormones and estrogens also can regulate how much serotonin we're making. Okay, and so it is not necessarily, I'm not saying there's no interactions between thyroid hormones and estrogens, but what I'm saying is that in this case, they probably both will act on the same common mechanism, which is regulate the levels of serotonin. It's not only serotonin, of course. You have many other neurotransmitters that are important, but it is sort of a common pathway, if you want. Most of mood disorders have lower serotonin. So that's why we need to eat chocolate.
Oh,
because
that's exactly what we need.
Chocolate is giving you tryptophan. Tryptophan is the precursor for serotonin. So go and have some chocolate. It's really good for your mood. I tell myself all the time.
Okay, so it is good to have a neuroscientist around. Can you give us a little more information on the actual parallel between estrogen levels and mood? because we've seen a little bit through life, but that reproductive period, which seems to be more stable, we do see some mood disorders
Yes,
appearing anyway.
we do. We do. The dysphoria that is around the time of menstruation, the word, what? Premenstrual syndrome. Thank you. See, my cognitive functions are gone. It's it's the age. But premenstrual syndrome. Exactly. You know, you remember this estrogen levels going down, you know, and that's before the menstruation, and that's what is happening. Exactly. That's the same.
So speaking about memory,
my favorite topic.
So how do hormones actually affect memory?
Well, as I say, I mentioned when estrogen levels are reduced, we have less cognitive functions, memory, flexibility in our way to think. You know, around menopause, we forget, oh, where did I put my keys? Oh, I thought I came here for something. I have no idea what, but maybe if I go away, it will come back. Those kind of little glimpse of memory loss. It's not really anything special, but it's because we have reduced levels of hormones.
And it's not necessarily pathological
No,
either, right?
absolutely not.
It's not necessarily
Yeah.
clinically.
And sometimes it's good to forget, right? There are things that are good to forget. So
we won't go into the denial phase of this session. You work a lot on stress responses.
yes.
So how does stress actually affect female hormones?
Okay. First of all, I want to, if we go into the stress issue.
Yeah.
Normally, women respond more to stress than men. And during the cycle, depending on the fluctuating levels of estrogen, we have a different response to stress. That's one thing. How they influence estrogen, and those are studies that are done in animals, but also in humans, in people who are very heavily stressed. What we see usually is, and you've probably talked about this when Dr. Israel was talking about anorexia, that it's amenorrhea. So a lot of stress can actually shut down your reproductive functions. And it makes sense because, you know, if you have to run for your life, it's not time to reproduce, really. So a very large amount of, and nowadays most of us are under chronic stress, right? But the levels can be very different. But if you're living a very heavy, important stress, then most of the time your reproductive function will be shut down. And why? Because if you need to reproduce, it takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of resources. And in fact, people who do a lot of exercise, you can see stress as exercise as a big stressor. Marathon runners, they don't have their periods anymore because the body says, no way, I'm going to make way for getting the resources for a fetus to grow because I don't have enough myself. You know, you're just using all my resources. So that's why it's actually shutting down. So you would see low levels of estrogens in marathon runner, for instance.
Very good. Do you know if across cultures, and I'm going a little bit in the cultural side, do you know if across cultures we have similar male, female hormone levels across cultures?
Yeah.
Is this something that's universal across
species, across cultures? Yeah. Yeah.
So they're all equivalent?
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
This
is a fundamental system in our body. I mean, we need to, after all, we need to eat, we need to breathe, we need to reproduce, right? That's the only thing we really need.
Simple things in life. Who needs a car, right? Really?
Yeah. Or a big TV. Or an iPod.
What would explain the fact that some women would be more sensitive to the cycles, the menstrual cycles? Does it have anything to do with the duration? Does it have anything?
Well, that's okay. There are many things that could make women more sensitive than others. And it might have to do with the way that our neurons that, let's just take serotonin. Our neurons that make the serotonin are responding to many different inputs from very different neurons. And you might have one of those, that those neurons are more sensitive to one of those inputs, and then it might regulate the levels of serotonin very differently in this person. So it really has to do with how this neurons is stimulated or not, in the right conditions or not. And we're all different. You know, we have sensitivities that are very different for different types of neurotransmitters, for different regions of the brain. We have a different way to process situations, you know. For one person, one situation, exactly the same. Two people will respond very differently to a different situation. And it's not only, I mean, I study how the brain is wired, so for me this is important. But in humans also, it's all the experience that we have had before that make us more vulnerable to some stimulus and some others. So
I was going to add another question, but I think that's a really nice way to finish on women's mental health. So I would like to thank Dr. Walker for being here.
You're welcome.
And answering all of our questions.
It was a pleasure.